Moving on to our second topic, looking at what's going on in the Windy City with the White Sox. This has been a very painful offseason, I would say, for most of us fans, just in terms of kind of what maybe we were expecting from a team that's currently in their title, window, if you want to call it that. I mean, we haven't really shown much in the postseason as of yet, but, kind of thinking of where the core is, where our money is and everything else like that. I mean, a lot of excitement going into, this winter and trying to, shed what happened last year. And, with that, we signed Mike Clevinger to a 1-year, $12 million deal. Starting pitcher for the Padres, previously with the Cleveland Guardians, was an absolute thorn in our sides as an AL Central foe. But, he's been in the news recently. I'm sure you've all seen it. There's a girl, I can't call him his wife, but a girlfriend of his, Olivia Feinstead, has posted a lot of content on Instagram, kind of detailing their relationship, a lot of domestic abuse that has taken place both in their relationship and in Mike Clevenger's other girlfriends' relationship. And he has kids with both women, and apparently is abused both physically and also mentally, emotionally, and as well as with their children, his children. So just a lot to kind of look at, to think about, to unpack when you kind of read through what Olivia posted on Instagram. Check it out if you can. It's available on Instagram for anybody in the public, but just a series of accusations on each one of her story posts. And then she also shared direct messages from women that have, dated Mike, known Mike through the past. I mean, talking a lot about his drug use, his temper, his abuse overall, physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. And, as far as reaction goes, the MLB, said they're gonna look at it with their domestic policy, coverage on domestic violence as well. The White Sox said they're going to look into this situation, comparing it to the Trevor Bauer situation. They put him on, immediately, some sort of immediate administrative leave, but the same hasn't yet taken place with Mike Clevinger. So there's been a lot of pushback in the media that have covered this topic so far, the Chicago outlets, as well as, David Sampson's podcast on CBS. So I guess with that, kind of first looking at what the situation was, and, in whatever kind of detail we want to cover it, but, what is your first kind of initial gut reaction to kind of what you heard, Wayne, both, for Mike, for the kind of women involved in this situation, and then ultimately, like, what do you think will happen as far as this kind of all playing out with the White Sox?
Yeah. So, first off, domestic abuse in any really capacity, whether emotional or physical, it just doesn't have any place, I think, in our society. So, that being said, then, I guess my second thought would be, we could have signed Johnny Cueto. Like, I think that was the next thought. It was like, we had no problems there, and then he had a decent ERA for us last year. He was one of our best pitchers. So, and could probably got him for cheap or less than Mike Clevinger. I think we paid like $10 million or something like that this season. So, kind of on a flyer. Yeah. So I think those are my second thought. That was like my second thought there. But I think going forth though, it's like, first off, I hope the White Sox, they do a little bit more, I guess, due diligence in terms of trying to figure out if we ought to be taking these pitchers here and there, or doing a little bit more on the background checks, and then just getting to know the players a little bit more and then before signing them and things of that nature. At least that's what you would think, I guess, in terms of a world-class organization, how they would kind of do that due diligence, if that makes sense there. So, but overall, though, I do like how you compared, I guess, to the whole, Trevor Bauer situation. If we're going to treat, Trevor Bauer, but banning him basically, right, for an entire season or two, right? It's like, how are we going to handle, this situation, Mr. Manfred, with Clevinger? I do believe it's like early in the allegations, but this is some nice evidence, I think, that this Olivia Feinstead has, I guess, with regards to Mike Clevinger. Obviously, Mike Clevinger denies it, or his team denies it. So, but like, again, it's like how do these players, I guess, find themselves in these types of situations often, and then how are the White Sox going to be dealing with this? Good that they're having him on some sort of leave. But yeah, overall, I'm hoping that, in the future they just do a little bit more better due diligence in terms of, giving these contracts to these players and then not getting Johnny Cueto, and all that in the future. So
yeah, I guess the first part of it, kind of looking at just overall reaction, I think it's really inconsistent with what happened with Trevor Bauer. I think that Bauer, in his case, there were pictures that had gone viral that were just pretty appalling, black eyes, some pretty heavy damage to the woman that was, reporting these allegations. I think immediately the amount of shock value that it kind of caused around the MLB and, around the mainstream media, I think that was like really hard for them to kind of just let them take their time to do the due diligence, to not do anything with Bauer first. And I think that's like when they immediately put him in leave, that was like, okay, we have to just put him there first. So we have shown that we've actually done something. And then we'll go about, finding out what this case might be. I mean, Bauer had a long rap sheet too of just, being a bad teammate, being kind of, up and down with his mood and kind of his personality and stuff, like a very tough guy to kind of figure out. And he may have some stuff there mental health wise. It's just like, you don't know the full picture, full story, but in the same sense, like he's always kind of been an outcast in the game. So I think in a lot of ways, like people were just glad to see him like outside the clubhouse and like, just like this guy's been sidelined by the league and, we'll keep it at that. Mike's a little bit different, but in the same sense, there were whispers that Olivia had made mention of this while he was with the Padres. And it was like slowly and surely like leaking into like the MLB and like those channels and stuff. And like, it didn't really all start to hit the fan until like, obviously a couple of days ago now, but it's just like, looking at the pictures, it doesn't like carry as much shock value when you see the markings and some of the scratching. It was still like obviously terrible, but in the same sense, it's just like, it doesn't captivate you in the way that like you see what happened with Bauer's situation. But in the same sense, like she's put together, quite a lot of anecdotes, quite a lot of examples of like what he's actually done in her situation, in another woman's situation. And then also has like verification of like, the other woman she's talking about is like pretty much confirming her story. And then there's like a series of other women that have either dated Mike, known a friend who went out with Mike. And it's just like, the deck is starting to stack up for this guy. Like, I don't want to sit here and be like, guilty before, we kind of prove him innocent or what have you. But like in a lot of these cases, like it takes a lot of courage for these women to like step up and actually say something because there's a lot of risk there. It's like, they could either be shamed, they could, if they don't win, they could be abused again. Mike could find, in theory, and I'm not trying to make this like his exact example, but, he could come back. I mean, he could come back in some sort of future situation there where, I mean, I think that would cause a lot of people fear, anxiety, especially like a public figure who makes a lot of money, who may have a little bit more power. And who knows, the type of personality it takes to like date a guy like that and to be with a guy like that and like stay there. So I think this kind of leads to like the second question or what have you, but like, MLB, NFL, NBA, they all have their policies. I'm sure other major sports do as well for domestic violence. Yet like year after year, we're seeing cases like from the Ray Rice situation all the way through what Bauer did last year. And, Miles Bridges, in the NBA kind of had, a huge story break. I mean, facing potential jail time, hasn't been signed by an NBA team. It's just like, are there things the league can actually do to improve this situation versus like, the administrative leave or taking away a year's pay or whatever it could be? Or like, do you think there's other policies that maybe they could put in place to like really start to make some sort of like systemic changes when it comes to, athletes and domestic violence?
Yeah, no, there's definitely I feel like I'm just kind of reading more about the situation a little bit. I think one thing, and I hope I'm getting my facts correct here, but it looks like there was Olivia Feinstich, the woman that is alleging, I think, Mike Clevinger on this abuse, but along with the child, is that she actually filed it with the MLB's Department of Investigations. I think the file came actually from this summer, this previous summer in 2022. So it's like, and then I believe Clevinger signed the contract sometime in November. So it's like, if somebody is under investigation, things like that, how do we reward him with a contract, even if it's like alleged, right? Even if it's, false claim. Like, again, this is where I guess go with the whole due diligence thing, and definitely trying to be sympathetic, not just like, oh, how come the White Sox did this and signed this and all that, but kind of why did the White Sox go with this? If I assume that they would look into things like that, right? Having some sort of contact with the MLB departments, like, hey, is there any investigations happening with this Mike Clevinger guy that we're looking to sign? Things like that to definitely help out with there. In terms of, I guess, just when these athletes, right, they're oftentimes the I don't know, just most testosterone filled individuals, and that's how they're oftentimes really good in their crafts, and that oftentimes then can lead to just filtered or kind of exposing as trauma, right? A lot of these players, they've been through a lot of trauma in their lives, whether it be single parent households or just mental or physical abuse on their own, which oftentimes, if you are one that experiences abuse, you might actually act on it, especially for a male, and that's kind of the unfortunate facts about that. So I definitely think things like mental health, which is becoming more prominent, and I think getting that exposure to athletes early on, I think can certainly help, whether it be at the maybe more collegiate level or even the minor league type of things. I think those types of things could help. If sure, a lot of the MLB or the players associations from all the major sports leagues, I'm sure, I hope at least that they do have some sort of psychologists and people of that nature to just for them to just talk and open up with, because I think one thing is that they are again, whether we like it or not, a lot of kids look up to them, and that's kind of the big thing there. Not to say that people are going to be looking up to Mike Clevinger for these things, but at the same time, it definitely is not a good look for the MLB. And yeah, like other situations, I think we've have talked about or are aware of, like things like with Michael Vick and dogs, things like that. It definitely helps, I think, just have, I think, with the athletes opening up. And then from the fan side too, I think one thing we oftentimes place on athletes, right, is like they got to be these alpha males, like taking down people and things like that, like kind of that Michael Jordan stereotype, where he's just like punching Steve Kerr as this person that if they were in a regular workforce, like, oh, we're gonna put this person in anger management or fire them, right? I think that's typically what happens when people act out in that kind of behavior. So things like that, I think, can at least help out. Just taking down the stigma, I guess, of mental health, and talking about your previous traumas, and then being aware of all that. And a lot of these players, their 20s, the 30s. I think Mike Clevenger is 32. It's like there has to be some idea of, I guess, maturing as you get older, or even in your 20s, because with all that money too, sometimes that can make people go a little crazy or think that they're above your average person, essentially, whether it be cognitive or not. So but yeah, I think things like that can definitely help out, and just having honest conversations too, I think, amongst everybody that are is dealing with those types of things, athletes from abuse and things like that that's happened in the past. So
yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. I mean, it's more like a carrot approach versus like the stick. I mean, the stick in this situation is like, hey, you never play the sport again, you never get paid, etc. But like, what can we do more earlier on in the process when you're a prospect? Or I don't know if there's like a chance to even go to like the AAU high school level, but it's just like start creating these outlets for especially athletes, because like you said, they're geared toward beating the competition, like being stronger, being faster, being tougher, mentally, physically, etc. So it's kind of like becomes a monster on its own, just to get yourself to the pinnacle level of whatever sport you're playing. So it's a mentality almost. So I think that's part of it. I mean, from the White Sox's point of view, I mean, the point about due diligence, the White Sox mentioned that they never heard about this, and like that's pretty sad. And in some senses, I don't really buy it. I mean, this is the same organization that hired Tony La Russa after a DUI, and I feel like this is starting to become part of their character, part of like what the organization is like willing to tolerate. In a sense, it's maybe not what they promote, but I just think there's a lot of like brotherhood within the organization that's kind of not been rooted out. And it's part of the frustration I think a lot of us fans have when you look at past players getting executive roles, a lot of the same guys sitting in the same offices for a long time under, Jerry Reinsdorf and such. And, I have a hard time buying it all. And, looking at Olivia's, just array of posts, I think the funniest thing about it is like, as much as she's willing to expose Mike for this whole situation, just like toss like damning amounts of evidence and you could definitely tell she's like emotional, passionate about, how she's felt about how this guy's treated her, others, the children especially. But it's like, even in all this, her final ask was like, I just hope the MLB, will make it mandatory for him to get therapy, to like go through the channels he needs to get better, and then give him some sort of small suspension. She even said small suspension. So it's kind of like, even she's just like not wanting to absolutely like, crucify this guy, which is shocking. But in the same sense, it's like, I think she's just still seeing it from like the human aspect of all this. And, it's kind of crazy as I was trying to think up like, what could be a better way or mechanism to like get them to stop, but, I don't think there are really like penalties you can throw on him after the fact. I mean, right now, Trevor Bauer's a free agent. He's done his time, but like nobody's touching him. And Ray Rice, his career went up in smoke. Like nobody heard from the guy ever again. And Miles Bridges, we'll just see if he makes his way back onto, an NBA court, but with just how big domestic violence is becoming in our society, and for good reasons. I mean, I think there's obviously been a lot of guys that have abused their positions of power and completely, done some very like damning things over the years to women and multiple women in that sense. So it's just like, it's nice to see that society's starting to come around, especially in sports. It's just like, hey, like we have a level of tolerance for certain things, but like this crosses like a pretty clear line.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely see, and I think it's like the argument, I guess, like with sports and how we treat athletes, right? It's like we oftentimes herald them as essentially gods, right? Like they are, if this is like the Greek Roman time, right? Like they are the gladiators, except instead of chopping each other's heads off, they're hitting a baseball or something like that. So they're definitely heralded in our own society. We buy tickets for them. We buy their jerseys, and then they're paid handsomely, even at the now college level. Now they're getting paid pretty handsomely. So it's definitely, I think, a reflection of our society. So that's, in my opinion, that's how we ought to be treating the athletes. And if we are to keep that reflection in an ideal state, or as ideal as possible, I think that's certainly is where we have to do things kind of chastise the people like Trevor Bauer that do these certain things, and potentially Mike Clevinger, what we did kind of with Michael Vick. At the same time, though, yeah, it is like, if they did do the time, if the court of justice, if all that, if they have applied some sort of punitive damages towards these athletes, and they have done the time, I definitely am for the second chance. I think that is one thing that sometimes, additionally, like our society, with how we treat, felons and convicts, it's like, throw away the key. They're never, going to do anything ever again, get a job or anything like that. That's definitely where I feel like, as a society, we ought to be open to second chances. Maybe not all the time, like, serial killers, things like that. That might be a little bit different, but obviously I think, for, things like with drug abuse, things of that nature, for sure. I am open towards, I guess, obviously trying to become a more forgiving society, but, yeah. So if they are able to do the time that is applied to them from, the courts, or even from the public areas, or from the, whatever the NFL, NBA, MLB, whatever they bestow on them, I'm also open to that as well. So for their returns, but yeah, I think forgiveness too is important there.
I do. And I maybe to an extent, I feel like, drugs and maybe petty theft or other sort of crimes, like I can more or less look past. I think like there is some level of like despicableness, if that's even a word, like when I look at somebody who's abusing women or children any sort of way. And it's like, yeah, it's like, I think at the end of the day, the penalties have been removed, and it's just like now the free market can decide like do we want you putting on our jersey? Do we want you representing our city? Do we want you speaking at press conferences, promoting products, wearing our stuff? And it's like, if the answer is no, it's like, hey, Trevor Bauer, you're still a millionaire. Miles Bridges, you can still rap and you still got, double digit, millions in the bank. It's like, hey man, you've made bank. You've earned it. But when it comes to today and like what we want and what, image we're trying to, put forward to our fan base and et cetera, it's like, yeah, I think if you cross a certain amount of lines, it's going to be very hard for you to just get that opportunity again. And, maybe these guys end up overseas, maybe they end up somewhere else for a while just to like kind of prove it and, give it a test run of like how they may look in another league, in another context. And like, if they want to bring them back in a few years, like, yeah, then maybe I'd be like able to see him kind of settle in. I'd hope there'd be like some sort of, commitment to therapy or community service for, whatever sort of crime they've done, like maybe kind of cater it to that kind of community service, like showing that they're like dedicated to changing in a lot of ways. But yeah, no, I guess the other thing too, I think when you were talking about the Greek gods aspect of it all, it's like now that we incorporate gambling, back into, society, and it's like socially acceptable, especially around sports. And, they're putting sports books in like all these arenas, like around the league. I think Washington Commanders, like maybe are the first NFL team or, one of the few that actually like established a sports book there. It's like, these guys are essentially like CEOs because there's just more money just pouring into this game from, the gambling aspects, from ticket revenue, from, broadcasting rights deals and stuff, where it's just like, hey man, like, yes, you are a ball player, but like you are a multimillionaire. And it's like, you need to like seriously toe the line like you're a corporate exec because you can't make any more sort of mistakes. And yeah, that's a ton of pressure to put on anybody. But there are a lot of, responsibilities, I guess, that come with like that kind of privilege.
Yeah, for sure. It is something I think that, some athletes are just a lot more prepared than others. And there definitely is, I think, that advantage of having either a parent or some sort of friend that was, or brother too, that has been a professional athlete. We've seen it time and time again. And, like when we're talking about Steph Curry or even Kobe Bryant, right? Those players, they had family that were professional athletes before. Oftentimes, yeah, it is, pretty hard when you do coming from like a very damning family background. We see, I guess, what happened, I guess, with, LeBron James, even like he's, I think, one example of someone that's like, came from, a low income household, just single mom, single parent there. Didn't really have his dad around, but you look at him now, I guess he definitely has like this pristine, like Family Guy type of image and is making movies and is one of the richest athletes out there now. So, things like that can happen, but oftentimes, yeah, if you come from a hard life background and you're all of a sudden given millions of dollars, like oftentimes what do we expect to occur? And we see these things happen time and time again. So, yeah, definitely I'm all for athletes just having those conversations. I did watch a little bit of was it Kwame Brown on the Pivot, actually, was one of the Pivot's like most recent guests. And yeah, just hearing about him talking about his whole life and kind of his situation. Yeah, it oftentimes is hard for people to overcome those things that you don't see on the basketball court or on the field. Because yeah, like I think once you hit a certain level of athleticism, sometimes it's honestly the mental parts that get to you. So yeah, hopefully we see, I think things we're experiencing now, we are going to see, I'm hopeful at least that we'll be seeing overall just better overall people in the athletics, in the athletic worlds overall. So, I think we're hearing, at least I'm hearing that there's a lot more, financial literacy and conversations like that happening a little bit more. So athletes are becoming a little bit smarter with their money, things like that. So, yeah, I think what we can do is just be hopeful of that. Things are working out or going the right direction there.
Yeah. And I don't want to understate the fact of like where certain athletes come from, like their backgrounds, their upbringings, like that definitely plays a huge part in all this too. Like there are cultural, norm standards that, may not take this as critically as seriously as like, general society might. Like when we went through the whole Adrian Peterson situation, of him talking about, how he's disciplined his son, that got a pretty ugly look. And I can't recall exactly like if there was any sort of game suspension involved. I believe there was, but it was almost like by him just mentioning like, this is what I grew up dealing with, is like how my father used to like discipline me. Like, this is kind of what I'm accustomed to, is what my, family has been accustomed to. It's kind of like, not that I agree with it, not that I truly accept that, but in the same sense, like I have to like at least acknowledge that like there are different parts of society that, don't have the same social services, don't have the same economic opportunities, maybe are militarized by law enforcement, or, live in communities that are kind of, plagued by drug use, abuse, et cetera, where it's like, yeah, man, they may not have the right role models in that sense. And, it can definitely play into a person's mind in general, like whether an athlete or not. But yeah, I think that was a good point that you made, because, everybody comes from different backgrounds, good and bad. And whatever happens with the situation with Mike, with other athletes, I think one common thread that we definitely have here is like, it's just important to identify it early on and see if like that particular person can get the kind of support they need, so we can just like start to curb like the amount of cases I think that come from each one of our pro sports on athletes and domestic violence.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, as long as we're moving the right direction, which I feel like we are, and I'm trying to just be hopeful about all that, then I think better things are to come for the future there.